Joining me now, Nancy Cook, a White House reporter for Politico, and Aaron Blake, a senior political reporter for The Washington Post. Thank you guys for being with us. It's obviously a lot on your plates today, and we'll get back to health care in a minute. But first, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joseph Dunford, announced today the U.S. will continue to permit transgender people serving in the military until the president gives them the directive to change the policy and implement it. Now, of course, this comes after the president tweeted he will ban transgender people from serving, which, as you know, appeared to catch the Pentagon off guard. Aaron, we'll start with you. What do you make of this memo from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs saying there will be no modifications, at least for now?
Well, it just shows that this whole thing was kind of done in a little bit of a scattershot manner. The president seems to have tweeted something that members of Congress weren't familiar with, that the Pentagon wasn't familiar with, that the Joint Chiefs of Staff weren't familiar with. By Wednesday afternoon, the White House was being asked whether the president believed that current transgender soldiers would be kicked out of the military. They didn't have any answers on that. It's just a really good example of why you don't announce a policy unless you've checked these boxes, checked with the people who are important to that process, and made sure this is something that you can implement. I think that this memo from the Joint Chiefs is a pretty bad indictment of the White House's handling of this, and it's certainly not an unprecedented situation in which that's happened.
Nancy, what do you think of this? Obviously, the president is the commander-in-chief, but can he change and implement this policy without more buy-in from the Joint Chiefs?
Well, it's not. I mean, that's usually a president would consult the agencies that would be affected by this, the cabinet secretaries that would be affected. And the fact that the president basically just made policy on the fly vis-a-vis a tweet, when in fact House Republicans had a much smaller issue with the transgender people in the military. It was that they didn't want the Pentagon to pay for sex reassignment surgery anymore. They didn't want the president to necessarily ban all transgender people. But the president went ahead and made this policy anyway, not fully understanding the nuance, I would argue. And he didn't give the agency any heads up. It really reminded me of what happened with the immigration and travel ban early in Trump's presidency, where there was also no coordination with the Department of Homeland Security or with ICE, and where a bunch of people were caught unaware in airports, on the middle of flights, and nobody knew how to implement this policy.
Was this a political miscalculation, Nancy?
I think the president just doesn't always understand the steps that it takes to carry out policy, that you would have to have rules governing then. If you're going to ban all transgender people from the military, you would have to have some guidance on what should happen to current transgender people in the military. And I don't think the president fully appreciates all the steps that governing takes. And I also feel like he doesn't always fully appreciate the court challenges that some of these policies face, like this transgender ban will certainly face.
All right, I want to turn to health care. Aaron, senators are pushing for this so-called skinny repeal, which would strip away the bare minimum, from what I understand, from the Affordable Care Act. What are the prospects for passage? What are you hearing?
Well, it's still going to be tough. I think passing anything is going to be tough right now. Senator Murkowski sounds skeptical of this. They only have 2 votes to spare in this situation. You know, this is not about what they're passing today or attempting to pass today. This for them is about passing something so that they can get this process into a conference committee where they can craft the actual bill. Even Lamar Alexander, the senator from Tennessee, admitted today basically that they have to pass this bill so that they can actually write the real bill. Not a terribly great way to do business perhaps, but this is basically what they're doing. They want to pass whatever they can through the Senate so that they can move the ball forward and work with the House on the actual final product. The question is whether they can actually get support for this specific bill to get to that point.
I mean, this one might say is sort of the lowest common denominator, and even as you say, that's in question whether they can pass this skinny bill. Nancy, the president tweeted about health care. As we reported earlier, his Interior Secretary made a call to Alaska's Senator Murkowski, reportedly threatening retribution. Is the president's strategy of applying pressure working, and is there anything else he can do?
Well, we saw this earlier with the health care bill when one of President Trump's outside groups also threatened an ad spending buy against Senator Dean Heller, who's facing a tough re-election battle in Nevada. I think the president thinks this will be effective, and he thinks that if he applies pressure, I don't think that senators necessarily feel that pressure from him, though, and I don't think that they're going to take an incredibly tough vote on health care that would potentially hurt their constituents or violate what their constituents wants just because the president tweets at them or has the Interior Secretary in a pretty unprecedented way basically call and threaten some policy initiatives of an Alaska senator.
Yeah, they need to think about their own constituents and those Medicaid costs in Murkowski's case. Meanwhile, more drama among the White House staff. Freshly minted communications director Anthony Scaramucci is angry that his financial information, he says it was leaked. Apparently it was public information. He seemed to suggest that the chief of staff, Reince Priebus, may be responsible. He's kind of backpedaled on that, although he still suggested the burden is on Priebus to prove his innocence. And Nancy, I'll go to you to untangle all of this. What's going on here?
Well, part of this has happened at Politico, or in the context of it. One of my colleagues was the one who got Scaramucci's financial disclosure form, which is a public document. All you have to do is ask for it, and wrote a whole story based on his wealth and his holdings and his business holdings. And he claimed, Scaramucci in a tweet last night, claimed that it was Reince who had leaked it, which is not true. This is a publicly available document. But I think it just speaks to a larger tense relationship that they have in the White House. You know, last week Scaramucci said, you know, we're like brothers. Today it was more like, well, we're like Cain and Abel brothers. And I think that, you know, Scaramucci has come in and he, you know, is supposed to be running the communication shop, but really he's functioning much more like a chief of staff and enforcer. And Reince Priebus has really been sidelined and his power has been diminished. And Scaramucci has already fired one of Priebus's aides in the communication shop. And I think that that relationship will continue to be tense as Scaramucci gains more and more power out of the West Wing.
That unified front lasted exactly 6 days. Aaron, you wrote in the Washington Post, this is the kind of reality TV drama that the president thrives on. How does the White House benefit from this public infighting?
Yeah, I mean, look at what just happened. The communications director for the White House called into a morning show and basically did all of this unprompted, spreading all kinds of innuendo about the White House chief of staff, who, by the way, should be his boss in any normal White House. He would be talking badly about his boss if this were set up like a normal White House. But Nancy's right that they're basically kind of co-equals at this point, it looks like. It's questionable what this really gets them. I think Trump likes this kind of thing. He loves reality TV. He comes from that world. And this kind of fight for loyalty among his aides may be something that appeals to him. But I'm not sure what really this earns the White House besides more stories about discord, more internal disputes between staffers. And so far, the product hasn't really been a whole lot. They haven't gotten health care passed. They don't have a signature piece of legislation. So you have to wonder exactly what the strategy is here.
Yeah. Drama aside, that's the essential question, is what is being done policy-wise. Finally, Aaron, no new attacks from President Trump on Attorney General Jeff Sessions, at least in the last few hours. But the Washington Post is reporting that the White House may be considering a recess appointment of a new AG if Sessions were to leave. What's that about?
Yeah, so there are a lot of ins and outs, especially with regards to the recess, you know, trying to get a new attorney general in there. It could be something the White House tries that would allow them to put somebody in that job without congressional approval. The Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley said that the Senate will not approve a new AG anytime this year. But the strategy is suspect because it looks like Democrats and definitely Republicans could try to prevent a recess appointment through some policy maneuvers, some political maneuvers in the Senate. I don't know that this would be something even Republicans would sign off on, frankly. So, you know, it's clear the White House is looking at all of its options here. It's not clear exactly how this is going to wind up or what they're going to try. But it's a, you know, they clearly want to do something about this, and so they're looking at all their options.
Nancy, let me have you weigh in on Sessions, because he's leaving the country today, heading to El Salvador to talk about gang violence. What do you make of the timing of his leaving the country in the midst of all of these questions swirling around his fate in the White House?
I think it's probably good timing, at least for him. It will allow him to lay low, get out of the president's face a little bit, you know, get some perspective. You know, the president doesn't like to fire people. Usually he has other people fire people. You know, Steve Bannon, for instance, fired Chris Christie and his team during the transition. So I don't think the president is going to fire Sessions, and I think Sessions' best bet is to lay low. And what I think is interesting about this whole debate is this is one of the first times that we've really seen Republican senators and conservative groups sort of set parameters up for the president. And they've really mobilized in the last few days to say, you know, President Trump, you should not fire Sessions. This would be a step too far. Whether or not he listens to them, of course, remains an open question, but it's the first time we've seen Republicans really try to put some boundaries on what they think the office of the presidency can and can't do.
Yeah, some real backlash there. Aaron Blake and Nancy Cook, thanks, guys.
Thank you.